Steve, can you discuss the importance of place-based breeding when it comes to revitalizing the regional grain economy?
Importance of breeding it in place is really incredible because of the different varieties. There's different market classes that excel, and especially when you're looking for the different products too, whether if you're doing something with a pastry wheat, club wheat is fantastic. If you're doing pancakes or some of your not so light pastries, soft white. Your breads are your hard red wheats, your durums are more for your pastas. But it's really important to get the right one for the people to try. I like to use my mom as an example. She's 84 years old, lives in a retirement community, grew up on Wonder Bread. And since we've been over here, I'd take her fresh ground flour. And she said she didn't know wheat had such good flavor. In fact, she said she makes her own bread. She usually uses a bread machine because she doesn't have much strength in her hands anymore. But she can only eat half a slice of toast for breakfast with this whole wheat stuff because it fills her up with all the fiber in it, or maybe just one pancake for breakfast. Getting people to try it. In fact, a while back, not to name drop, but Bill Gates came up to our place. It's quite a rodeo. And he had a little blog. It's on our website, Gates Notes. But you could tell they had a table set out of different whole wheat products. And he kind of turned his nose up. You know, he grew up in the 70s like I did. And whole wheat products then were more like doorstops, essentially. And they tasted horrible and the texture was horrible. And he ate some of these products and couldn't believe it. And we had to make up 25 bags of these different products for all the people that were with him to take back with them. So a lot of it is just getting people to try them, and then they realize just how great they are and how healthy is the added benefit.
And can you address the difference between breeding? I know you did commodity breeding for 20 years versus what you're doing now in terms of sort of that end product. With a lot of the commodity wheat, the flour is bred to have the bran and germ removed. Versus what you're doing now?
Yeah, because a lot of it, I mean, when we use breeding, the different techniques as selection criteria. I mean, you take it in, the products, after it gets so far along, I get enough seed that I can have them bake some bread with it or do some of the different rheological tests on it. And we use those as selection techniques. Well, a lot of it, what used to happen with the commodity side is the first thing they do is they mill the wheat, very first thing. And so they're testing all of this without any of the bran or germ there right away. Rather than have it as whole wheat, and is it strong enough, you know, the dough, the protein to carry this through to make a decent loaf of bread. So there is really quite a bit of difference there.
Great, thank you. Tom, an often neglected portion of the grain value chain is storage, processing, and distribution. Can you share your experience with the storage, cleaning, and food-grade storage requirements that the new regional grain economies require?
Yeah, you know, we had a huge advantage because we already had a cleaning facility that cleaned seeds and so on. We understood that part a little bit. We had multiple bins because when we grow lots of different types of grass seed, we need to isolate all of those. And so the idea of identity preserved grains or identity preserved crops was not new as we changed. But Sue and I get approached because somehow we've developed a little bit of a reputation as being leaders in this, and we get approached by all kinds of economic development folks and so on from around the country that say, well, we'd like to duplicate what you've done. And to a degree, we've been able to do that. Cairn Springs Mill in Burlington, Washington, about an hour north of here. We're co-founders with Kevin Morse and with the port and the bread labs that help with that. But it all starts with, one, you got to have good growers and in an area that can grow wheat and grains, and then the cleaning and storage infrastructure. Cairn Springs is a little bit behind. We got to build out more there. That we had no idea, you know, we did not know the word third-party audit when we started this journey 10 years ago, and all of the requirements, and that why are we spending $30,000 for a metal detector now to keep selling flour to customers that have been long-term customers? So it's been such a learning curve, and we never would have got there if we didn't have that asset. We've helped other mills. They try to put a small cleaning facility and in a facility that they're also milling, baking in, and we have the advantage of being separate, which is advantageous for a lot of reasons. So the idea, if you can be that romantic, that yeah, we're going to grow the grain and mill it here and everything. There's a lot of steps between growing and milling that need to be considered. We've got a big cold storage facility that we use. Most of our organic grain is frozen and goes into cold storage to make sure that we don't get insect issues with it, you know. And so we never even envisioned that to begin with, but there's all of those key community elements that are critical to that.
Great, thank you. Sue, we understand that you sell your flour to school districts in Oregon. Can you talk about how that partnership came about? Some schools may be hesitant to immerse themselves in the local food movement out of either financial concern or other challenges. So we'd love to hear how this came together.
Well, it came together in the original process by another friend of mine who worked for me and also taught at the same middle school. We went to the school board meetings, and we took our 5 minutes along with our apple carrot muffins, and you know, taste testing really does work. And we gave them the little spiel about how we could help them get our hard white spring wheat into their school system and work with their price points, you know, because we felt that it was very important to add at least something that was local and whole grain into that system. And of course, when they taste that muffin, a nice moist muffin, and they always have 2 high school kids usually on each of the school boards, and the high school kids are always like, oh my gosh, you know, and they want more. You know, that kind of sells it, just like when we worked at the farmer's market. You give them a sample, they want to buy the product because the flavor is amazing. We also would help them by, because a lot of the schools in our school districts do not have the infrastructure inside their kitchens anymore to do that in-house baking and making it from scratch. So my gal, Stephanie, and she would make a mix out of, you know, some simple product, like for a biscuit mix that they could use savory, or they could use it sweet, or they could use it in any other fashion to make a biscuit. We work with a local bagel company and sell them our flour so they can make bagels for our school district, because kids will eat bagels and they don't know where the flour's from. Soon they will learn, but at least they're getting it in their diet. We have a lentil barley soup mix that we sell in the store and just to customers, but we showed them how to make it into soup and to make it into a vegetarian burrito, because kids will eat burritos. You just put cheese and sour cream or whatever in a burrito, and here they have a shelf life protein source that they can use 2 different ways. Field trips, you know, again, out at the schoolhouse and bringing kids out. We can't have enough field trips actually for all of the teachers that want to come out. Once they come out, that hands-on experience is really important to solidifying. And then the schools are starting to come on board one by one. Tom works really carefully with, you know, making sure that we can really meet those price points for them, because that's usually a really big issue. And so, you know, it's not making a lot of money maybe for us, but it's putting that work where we really think it's important.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, something more.
One other thing on that point, you know, in Oregon, and I think it can go many places, this is local grown and processed food has an advantage in the school system. Our legislature meets each biennium, and I think it's up to $5 million that now is available to the school districts to buy Oregon grown or processed products for inclusion in their menu to help price stabilize it. And it'll pass nearly 100% because the rural areas see it as economic development. The urban areas view it as the kids getting access to better foods. And so in today's political climate, that's pretty amazing.
Great. So this is a kind of a question for all of you, but I'm going to address it to Steve first. There is a lot of excitement surrounding local grains and the regional grain economy. What are the primary bottlenecks in this regional grain system, and what can be done to make local grains more accessible to consumers? I'm going to start with you, Steve.
Well, from an academic standpoint, funding, basic funding in research. When I was over at Pullman, I was overseeing an $800,000 a year budget. I came over here, and Steve didn't tell me when he hired me, we had zero budget. Over there, the farmers in eastern Washington, the 19 counties, it's the state law, they assess themselves 0.75% at the first point of sale. And they get multiple, many hundreds of millions of dollars coming in because over 2 million acres are there. There's no assessment over here. The funding that we do get is from people and businesses that have asked to partner with us to help Cliff Bar, Patagonia, King Arthur Flour, different ones, just to name a few. That's the first bottleneck. After there, you get into many of these growers are smaller growers. Eastern Washington, Whitman County, #1 producing county in the state for wheat. Average size farm is 1,000 acres. Over here, it's 100 acres. Most of them are about 50 acres or less, but yet the farm gate value is almost the same because it's just higher value crops here. So there's a bottleneck there of equipment. I get guys calling me all the time, how do I harvest this? I planted 2 acres now. How do we harvest it? Or where do we get the seed? And I'm always telling them, call Tom down there. There isn't seed dealers over here for wheat. They'll have to go to Eastern Washington, truck it back. Just equipment, everything. There's a lot of bottlenecks. And then what can be done to make it more accessible? I think a lot of it has to do with affordability. We work with a lot of huge bakeries literally around the world, and we have huge 5-deck ovens, all this sort of stuff, steam injected, but yet we like to say our most important oven is a little portable oven we have. We take it around to food shelters, women's shelters, food banks, women's shelters, and teach them how to bake bread on their own, how to make it, and how to make an affordable loaf. We had a former baker, test baker for us that's now has his own bakery in Washington, D.C. He sells $15 loaves. Well, not everybody can afford that. If we can get it down to about a $2 loaf that lasts, looks like a sandwich loaf, up in our area when we take extra bread they may have after a class comes through to food bank, if it's not sliced and if it doesn't look like a regular sandwich loaf, they won't take it. They don't know what it is. So a lot of it has to do that way with affordability. But once they can and they taste that whole wheat, they're hooked.
Thank you. Tom?
I'd say that the bottleneck is because we start with the premise, since we're farmers, is if we can't earn a premium with what the grain that we're doing and this mill, then why are we doing this venture if we can't make our community stronger and the farm community stronger by paying a premium? So we're pushing a price point up through the supply chain that begins higher. We are not do not want to be engaged in the race to the bottom to see who can do anything the cheapest. We recognize that we've got to be within reason in the price point. And we love to brag that we provide grain to Dan Barber and so on. But at the same time, that does not make an awful lot of sense to ship grain 3,000 miles, other than we have some varieties that he likes and so on. The other thing is everyone in this room can help with the education that whole wheat is not whole wheat. Whole wheat could be soft white wheat that has a very different adaptation range. Sue mentioned the hard white spring wheat. We call that stealth health. You can get kids to eat something that's got a whiter bran level from hard white spring wheat, but with all of the nutrition of a hard red spring wheat, but without the bitterness and the tannins of a hard red whole wheat. And so much of it is both educating our consumers that, well, yeah, I can get whole wheat flour cheaper, but is it hard red? Is it hard white? Organic? Is it identity preserved? Is it the variety that you'll have those consistent results with? Because oftentimes the varieties that we select, that our bakers want, is not the highest yielder. And so we have to be able to make up that yield difference at the farm. So it already handicaps us at the start. So that's, there again, it's just that marketplace dynamic is a bottleneck.
Sue, do you want to add anything?
I think Tom said that well.
So this kind of follows on to that in terms of scale. Much of the activity in the grain economy in the regional and localized grain economy in the Pacific Northwest tends to be on the smaller side. What advice do you have for larger operators who are interested in taking steps in this direction? And do you have any examples of companies who are working with local heritage whole grains on a larger scale?
Well, the large-scale operators, they do have the option of the commodity system that they can go into, really, and they have that support too that is there. It's really the small and mid-sized ones that need the help. I mean, they can get into it. You see some of that. Some farmers in eastern Washington now are starting to do that kind of on the side, growing a few hundred acres or something different, trying to maybe find a mill that will mill it for them and get into this direct marketing type thing. And yes, there are some large companies that do try and get, I was recently reading, this summer, I think is it Baking Business News or something like that, they were talking about, I think it was La Brea that is contracting with the farm in Montana for tuna wheat. And even though it doesn't yield much at all, they like the flavor of it. And I don't know how much of it's a publicity ploy and how much they're really doing. I tried growing for tuna up here and it doesn't work at all. It doesn't taste any different than anything else. But there, it is, these different grains, it really is about locale. Things can taste different depending on where they are grown. Tom, you got any?
I think the best known example here in the Pacific Northwest is the Shepherd's Grain growers, and they're all dry land, no-till growers, mainly in eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, and the Palouse area of Idaho. And yet I think most of those growers can only market 15 to 20% of their grain on average through that cooperative. Our farm, 2,700 acres, and we're only able to, as whole grains, because we do supply distilleries and breweries and so on, and flakes and flour and all the way through, we're only getting close to 30% of our acres are devoted to that value-added segment. And so that's just a challenge because of the fact that we mentioned earlier about the rotations, because you can't grow wheat on wheat on wheat without cover crops, the rotations, and so on. So those other markets are essential.
Thank you. And I was going to follow up even based on the last slide that Michael showed from Sweet Green about the crop rotations, and have you share a little bit, Steve, on how that sort of helped evolve the Bread Lab program in the Skagit Valley, what wheat was really being used for.
Yeah, up there we have farmers that grow wheat. They're not wheat farmers. Like, there's about 80 different crops grown commercially in this little valley of about 85,000 acres. And they pulverize the soil. They have to for their bulb crops, for their fresh market round potatoes. And so because of that, they need the organic matter that the wheat or barley, these grains, add. And so they've been doing that for several years, plus the breaking up the rotation, breaking up these disease cycles. They need the rotation. But for years, they didn't make any money on it at all. It was just there. Some years they just plow it under. They knew they needed it there. And that's where they said, would you work on this, somehow get value to us? Well, the first thing I did is some variety testing trials, which they'd never had before. They're growing the totally wrong varieties. I mean, they were losing up to $700 an acre just by not having the right variety in there. First eye opener, and then just not growing the right market class of wheat always, not growing them in correct rotation with what they were doing, and it's phenomenal. And you can't blame them. I fault WSU. WSU wasn't helping them at all. They had a research or extension center there, but they were concentrating on things that made them money, which makes sense. But now they're able to make money in other areas too, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. So let's transition from wheat and talk a little bit about whole grains that exist beyond wheat. What other whole grains are you seeing in the Pacific Northwest, and how are those grains being used in processing and baking, end user markets?
I think a couple of grains that we really love for different reasons. One is rye, and we grow two varieties of rye, one that can be adapted to spring and one is fall, because the marketing options. We started planting rye initially because for rye flour for the bakery market, but now that we have a flaker, we can sell rye flakes, and we market rye chops. We've got rye flour. There's some really good whiskey just a few blocks from here that's made with Hunton's farm rye grain that we mill. And the distillery market is a real growing market for us. I think maybe that's a bad misnomer, but I think we sell to more distilleries than we do school districts. So there's probably something wrong with that. But anyway, the other one is that for us, it's small, and certainly compared to the Teff Company, the fellows from Caldwell, Idaho here that understand it a lot better. But we were talking last night that teff from Ethiopia and Eritrea area, certainly not native to our area, but we started growing it as an experiment, found that it adapted very well. And we can tell you pretty well where every Ethiopian and Eritrean diaspora is in the western United States. It's the food of the homeland from those people, and culturally it's been amazing for us. We've now got friends from Ethiopia and Eritrea that distribute teff flour for us, and there's such a ritual of dealing with other cultures that I'm pretty transactional, trying to stay on top of 5 businesses and everything else. Sometimes I get a little too cut and dried, and it's refreshing to deal with someone from Ethiopia. Once I figured out how to do this, the coffee buyers in this town from Starbucks also buy coffee there, and they share that same story with me. You better start negotiations with good coffee. You sit down, and there's a very ritualistic process, and then you're going to haggle and barter about price. And today, the price you set is not good till next week, because they're going to come back and say, but that was last week, can't you do better? And, it was just a relationship building. Now, we have some of our closest friends in who we distribute it to. And that was a totally unanticipated segment. Teff now is one of our more important flour products. We understand the religious connotations of when their Easter fast ends, we better have plenty of teff flour available. Totally mind-blowing for a couple of wheat farmers and grass seed farmers from Oregon for the cultural exposure of that grain. And it's a prominent one for our growers, our farm, our other growers, and the mill.
That's great. What about you, Steve? Other crops you see besides wheat and their importance?
Buckwheat's been mentioned quite a bit. The hulless barley is coming on quite strong in the area for food. So basically.
Yep. Okay, so if you're going through the trouble to grow a heritage grain, it seems like it's a shame to mill off the bran and germ so that it's like any old white flour. I know you work with bakers and chefs and provide them with grains. Can you speak to some of the culinary advantages of working with local and heritage whole grains?
Local more so really than the heritage. The heirlooms really, they are so expensive because the yield is so poor, if you really want to get it, that we found out that the local, especially up in the Skagit Valley, there is such a terroir. We've baked the same variety of wheat from eastern Washington and up here, and it's like the difference between a Red Delicious apple and a Cosmic Crisp. I mean, it really is. It's phenomenal. We've sent, when everybody's dropping Dan Barber's name, he was out here and he got some triticale from us, and he ran out in his restaurant. He wanted some more. We didn't have any. I drove over to eastern Washington, got some, sent it to him. He wanted to know what's wrong with it. I mean, and that happens quite often. Our bakers just a couple months ago baked a loaf of bread, same variety. They didn't realize the second day they sourced it from someplace else. They thought they'd done something wrong. So there's really a terroir. And really, any place you go, when you can identity preserve a variety of wheat, and it doesn't really matter if it's old or modern, and if you can keep that separate, they have unique flavors. I mean, just as dogs have unique characteristics and looks, so do wheat, and people don't always realize that.
Yeah. Tom and Sue?
A lot of the things that we bake at the bakery are, like I said, whole grain, and so it's really exciting to actually provide a cookie that is a buckwheat teff ginger molasses cookie that everyone loves, but someone that is maybe gluten intolerant can eat. And it's exciting to be able to say that our chocolate chip cookie is baked with pastry flour and rye flour, and they're going, rye flour? And I'm going, yes. Of course, the chocolate and the little salt on top really helps. And then we have a snickerdoodle that's just hard white, whole grain, spring wheat, and people are just amazed, that they can actually be enjoying something that's delicious and healthy. And so I say, well, think about it as just being, nutritious and delicious, because then they don't feel so guilty eating their cookie. And a lot of our pastries are that way too, and people are starting to enjoy, tasting the differences between these grains. And they actually do have flavor. Our rye bread is a recipe that Tom and I brought back from Denmark, and it's 100% rye. We have people that call us on the phone and say, can you hold back too? Or, because they're amazed that this rye bread that they are getting is crusty on the outside and really moist on the inside, and it'll keep. Rye has this amazing, and Steve probably knows more about this natural preservative or something in it that will keep. So these flavors are starting to, people are starting to really sense these flavors. I do not like caraway, so I was really delighted to know that rye bread doesn't need to really have caraway in it. It really doesn't always have caraway in it. Spelt is a flour that we sell that is one that you can almost substitute one for one. It's a little bit fussier than other flours, but it has a unique flavor. So I just enjoy people, tasting these different kinds of grains and really, really saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. And it's education.
Before we take questions, I want the panelists to share restaurants and venues in the area where they know their products are, or some of the research that they've done have gone into, so that while you're visiting, you might be able to see some of these incredible grains.
A few that I wrote down off the top of my head were Canlis Restaurant, June Baby, Solare, Herb Farm, Grand Central Bakery, Mercrina Bakery and Cafe. Tom, you got a lot.
A lot of those repeats, the very motivated chefs and bakers in this town and others try to reach from all of us that are very, very similar. So Grand Central Baking. If you want to taste some really good whiskey, rye whiskey, Fremont Mischief in the Fremont area. So Grand Central would be our largest bakery customer, but also June Baby and Solari. Eduardo is a phenomenal chef, James Beard Award winner, and we supply product there. Portland, we have a whole, not many of you are going to make it down there, but anyway. Seattle and Portland areas are really foodie towns that really try to take farm to table serious each and every day.
What about imbibing? Any distilleries or breweries in the area that you can think of as well?
Well, I also want to say that Chad Robertson uses our flour too. Breweries?
Fremont, no breweries here where we're just starting to test some dark roasted grains with the brewery up in
Chuckanut.
Garden Side,
Okay.
but mainly distilleries to this point.
That's great. I just want to put a plug in too at the Cascadia Grains Conference in January 2019. It's going to be in Olympia, and we're going to do a hot steep analysis looking at terroir of the WSU Lyon barley variety produced on 3 different farms. So if you get a chance to come to the conference, we do have some cards out there. You'll get an opportunity to do a really nice flavor and aroma analysis with the Lyon barley, named after Steve here, that's being used now in craft brewing and distilling. So we have time for questions. Anyone have questions?
Excellent panel, really insightful and motivational. But I live in the South. Carol and I are neighbors. And most of what we can buy in our grocery store is mass-produced whole wheat flour. So, I mean, I know there are unique properties about your flours, and it's fresh, and and probably fresher than what we get in the grocery store. So how do we inspire consumers to want to use those products that don't have that TLC that maybe yours do? And it's a two-part question, because the other thing is consumers are really concerned about pesticides on wheat and GMOs. So I know it's loaded, but those are the things that are on minds of consumers. Thank you.
I can say there's officially no GMO wheat, or legally, in the marketplace right now. There's been some discovered here and there, because it is sitting on the shelf ready to go. I mean, it'd be Roundup ready type stuff. But yeah, they found some in Oregon down there a couple years ago, just a little bit, and the market collapsed right away, and it's a big deal. So officially, there's none out there. Pesticides, there is pesticide residue on stuff. There can be. I do like Tom does with our stuff. I got him to build me a walk-in freezer, and I just stick it in the freezer to get rid of any insects. Most farmers do not apply glyphosate as a desiccant. I mean, I hear they do sometimes up in North Dakota in that way, but you hear a lot of kind of fear talk about that, and I don't think it's as much as people like to say. Whole grains are coming, flavor down there. We worked with David Van Sanford, breeder at University of Kentucky, and in fact, Steve Jones is down there this week. They're having a seminar about just this, whole grains and flavor, things like that. So it is shifting down that way, and it's on the East Coast quite a bit, up in Maine and Vermont area. It's kind of a movement that's starting to seem to take foot and come around.
So everything that we do is stone milled. It's an old, very cumbersome and clumsy way, but it imparts uniqueness in that grain kernel very first is crushed, and so the oil in the germ that's present in the germ and the bran are really totally combined. Whereas modern milling in a roller mill works to segregate and then recombine for whole grain flour. So I think but that also then tends to make shorter shelf life because of the potential rancidity of the oils and so on. Our team and lots of people approach us constantly about entering the retail market, and that's a total world away from what we do. You know, we do a little bit on our online store and so on, but we don't understand the supermarket business. We debated last night. I wrote my semi-weekly newsletter that goes in our email newsletter to our customers about glyphosate in cereals. And how does it happen, and why, and the concern. So anybody early on, since day one, we have written into our production contracts for whether it's for our mill or the Cairn Springs mill here, that the growers attest to before we even deliver the seed to them, that they will not use glyphosate as a harvest aid. Makes it a lot easier if you wanted to do that in the northern prairie provinces and so on, instead of swathing it, letting it dry in the field and so on. We're not saying that our farm or other growers, our growers, don't use glyphosate, but it's always weeks to months prior to a grain crop being planted in that field on our conventional. So I think the message in my little missive last night is, if you're most concerned by organic, the next best step is to deal with a miller and a grower that you know and understand their production ethics and practices.
Back in the...
Just a quick comment. So I'm Don Troba with Ardent Mills, and I think we need to be careful about picking on mass market whole grains, using some of these terms. I think they're a little negative. I think for a lot of consumers, it's about choice, and even with a traditional whole wheat flour that you might get at a grocery store, yeah, you want to make sure it's fresh, it's not rancid. I think that's a food supply thing. But those are good products as well. They deliver fiber and nutrition to people, and we need to have recipes for folks like that, because these grains are expensive. We're doing a lot of things at Ardent Mills with specialty grains as well, but the supply chain, the price, there's a lot of things that go into that. And I think also, as a company that has steel roller mills, We have oil in our grains too, and so again, I'm not saying we should pick winners here between some of these different types of processing. They're just realities. So I just want to make a couple comments on that. But it's great work and a great panel.
Thank you, and I want to follow up because I know the majority of work that WSHU does is in large-scale systems, and I guess, you know, when I came up and said that we are also a bit of disruptors as well, it's because we do work outside of that primary commodity-based system that the academy that we work for really supports. And so I agree with you completely. There's no winners or losers here. It's just a different continuum, so thank you.